Hello my friends, check out my website. I was an inmate in an unnamed prison for 2 years, something else was locked in there with us part 3.
Come morning. Andre's body was nowhere in sight. Predictably enough. He was dragged off to God knows where like everyone else. Mason and I did our best to get rid of any evidence, throwing Andre's severed ear to the ground floor through the bars of the cell. But we couldn't do anything about the blood. Or about our injuries. Mine were masked by the jumpsuit. Long stripes of skin turned purple as they bruised. But Mason's face was in shambles. We rehearsed some bullshit to tell the guards. Even though we both expected it to be useless in the end. No way in hell they'd take our side over their precious rats. I don't care either way. Mason admitted. I want to get to Block C. Then why not attack someone? I asked. And why get me involved as well? 'Cause I would have preferred not to be dragged there in handcuffs. Mason answered. To get the chance to gather some intel and sneak over during another blackout event. But if we get sent to the ground floor, I can still make it work. That was our most likely fate. We didn't know yet how many perished last night. But some were bound to. The guards would need replacements. So for a few days no one would be sent to Block C. All rule breakers would go straight to the ground floor no matter the offense. It wasn't ideal. But at least it would buy us some time. With that in mind, we made our way down when the guards entered the block. As soon as they caught sight of Mason's face, one pointed at us and the other one took off. We expected him to grab us right then and there. But instead he rushed past as the first guard waved us over. What happened to your face? He asked Mason when we got close. Our cellmate attacked us last night. Mason lied like we agreed. The guard raised a finger and stopped him. We waited in silence until the other one returned. And they talked between each other for about half a minute at most. Hushed whispers so we wouldn't hear. And when they were done, they escorted us out of Block A with rifles at our back. We were split up, and I was taken to an interrogation room. I won't go into details. They're not really important. But suffice it to say they were brutal. They had no qualms with torturing me as they asked the same questions 100 times over. But I stuck to the story Mason and I rehearsed. I refused to crack. In the end though, it didn't matter. After every inch of my body was bruised and hurting, I was escorted back into Block A to one of the ground floor cells. They shoved me in and locked it behind me as the existential crisis finally sank in. This wouldn't be good. About half an hour later or so, I saw Mason as well. I didn't hold out hope he'd be my cellmate. Ground floor was solitary. But I hoped he'd be near enough to me so we could talk. No dice. His cell was opposite of mine all the way across the floor. My time there was boring beyond belief. There's no worse torture than that in my opinion. I'd take the interrogation room treatment over it in a heartbeat. I held out for the first few days. But after that I started going off the rails. Alternating between catatonic periods. Rage. Resentment. Fear. Every day was a roll of the dice as to what the main emotion would be. But I went across the spectrum. Some days I got food. Some days I didn't. Being at the mercy of the other inmates meant going hungry and thirsty for long periods of time. I lost weight steadily because of it. I could feel my body growing weaker. Chris really had been a godsend for the rest of us in this place. I just never understood how much so. Anyways, the 2 months passed and we got our next blackout event. Only this time I had front row seats to the whole thing. It started out slow, like the other two had, with the power cutting out followed by distant sounds of pounding on the doors of Block C. Some of the other ground floor inmates started weeping. Others started pacing about in their cells. A few even pulled desperately on the bars. I looked across the floor for Mason, to see what he was up to since things were apparently going to plan. Given the large distance between us we couldn't talk. We'd have had to yell back and forth and that was a no-no. Mason stood in front of his cell door, arms crossed as he waited for the electronic lock to release. He seemed ready for some action. When he noticed me staring, he pointed at the main entrance with a finger. A clear signal for me to meet him there. So I started thinking of ways to accomplish that. The pounding grew faster and louder. And the signature mist the event brought seeped into our building under the door. Block C's doors finally gave way just as the stairs to the upper floors started lifting off the ground, isolating us down there. A myriad of emotions washed through me all at once. Most of them drowned out by the overwhelming fear. We stood a chance. Mason and I. Other inmates proved you could survive. But we didn't know how they did it. So the chance was slim. The skittering outside got nearer, filling me with adrenaline. And the mist already reached at waist level. I took one final look at Mason. Then at the main entrance. And readied myself. The lock to my cell beeped a couple of times. And the door opened on its own. Banging started on our main entrance door and the mist reached all the way up to my neck. So I didn't waste any time. As soon as I could leave the cell I did so. Dashing out and following the wall to my right. Gunning it through the middle of the room would have been suicide. I either would have missed the main entrance or ran into whatever came through it. This way I had a solid point of contact. Something to keep me on track and keep me steady. On my way I passed the other cells and tried to peer inside. But I couldn't see Jack. The mist reached over my head at that point. So I couldn't make out my own hand if I reached out my arm. But I heard the other inmates. Loud and clear as they cowered and cried out in fear. Nothing I could do about it. Though. I wasn't even sure if I could save myself. I made it to the main entrance before the door opened. So I squatted down next to it and waited with bated breath. Not making as much as a peep. Since I figured sound was the only way for them to find us. Visibility was too low. And any smells would get dampened by the mist as well. But without sound, I had no chance of finding Mason either. The things banged on the entrance a few more times. And the flimsy lock broke. The doors flew wide open. Crashing against the walls. And I heard the tide of feet rushing inside right beside me. Couldn't see them. Though. Only vague shapes that looked inhuman. Distorted shapes. Some bulky. Some spindly. Some low to the ground. They were monsters. Alright. Keeping the layout of the ground floor in mind like a map, I tried to guess what was going on based on what I could hear. The monsters rushed the cells first. Getting to all of those who hadn't been brave enough to leave and setting off the carnage. Screams erupted all around. Making it hard to discern anything else. But I had my first big clue. Leave the cell ASAP. After that, the monsters ran around at random through the mist as they tried to hunt down everyone else. They leapt ahead. They crashed into the walls. One even hit a steel beam only feet away from me. That was my second clue. Keep quiet. And keep to the walls. Once in a while when one of them found and killed someone, they'd drag them out of the building. Most of the time they were dead. But I heard some still crying and weeping in the grasp of the creatures. Mason hadn't reached me yet though. So I suspected the worst. That he got caught on the way. But I had no way to tell. All I could do was to wait and pray I'd survive. The minutes passed slowly. And I didn't budge from my spot. The screams died down one by one and the monsters steadily left. Until there were only a few of them around. I thought that was it. I made it. So I resolved to look for signs of what happened to Mason before it returned to my cell. Even the mist started to settle and dissipate. So I was sure I was in the clear. Then another monster passed by. And the inmate it carried let out a grumbled fuck. Mason? I asked out loud. Yay, help. The monster paused. I could vaguely see their shapes. Halfway out the door. So I rushed over. The creature let out a high-pitched yelp and took off. Dragging Mason along on his back. We left the building and ran through the courtyard as the mist lifted more and more. The details were still obscured. But I could make out the overall picture. It looked like a human bent out of shape. Pulled and stretched into a crocodilian body plan. Except it ran backwards. Keeping a hold on Mason and its eyes on me. Let go of him. I yelled and sped up. My body wasn't happy about that. The muscular atrophy and prolonged starvation took their toll on me. But I had to push myself and save Mason. Else I'd be on my own. I couldn't catch up to them but, running blindly as it did, it was only a matter of time until the creature tripped on something. Before it regained its bearings, I was on top of it. I jumped up and landed on its flat, deformed spine, kicking the back of its head. My toes hurt through the thin shoes. It felt like I struck a slab of concrete. Mason joined in as well though, kicking it under the chin with his free leg. Our combined assault did little damage, but it was enough to annoy the creature. It let out another yelp and released Mason, bucking a few times to get me off as well. I landed on my ass in the sand, and it took off running towards Block C empty-handed. Fucking hell, Mason complained, sprawled on his back as he struggled for breath. Come on, let's go back before anyone spots us. I helped him up, and we shuffled back towards our block propped into each other. Mason had some nasty cuts and large bruises, but nothing life-threatening as far as I could tell. He assured me he'd tear his jumpsuit to shreds and use it as bandages to stop the bleeding. So he'd be fine. What now? I asked him when we got back inside. Do we go back to our cells? Yeah, Mason answered. The doors will close when the electricity comes back on. And who knows what the guards will do to us if they find us outside. Fair point. But we still had a few minutes until then and we wouldn't get another chance to talk. So talk we did. Mason told me what happened to him. Apparently he hesitated and didn't leave his cell right away. When he did, he made a beeline to the main entrance and ended up bumping into someone else. The man got scared and attacked him. They fought until the monsters barged in. So he ran around at random to escape them. But the madman pulled it off. He'd been insanely lucky. I told him what I did. And we quickly devised a plan for the next event. We'd do the same thing I had done. Meet up. And rush out into the courtyard the moment the monsters were all inside. Some stragglers were bound to linger outside. But the majority of them would be drawn to the ground floor by the screams. Once in the clear, we'd make a break for Block C and find out the truth. With our plan made, we returned to our cells. Electricity came back a little while later and the doors closed on their own, trapping us once again. I didn't know what to expect. But the guys from Block B rushing in with rifles in their orange jumpsuits, wasn't it? They did a quick sweep of the ground floor, finding a single man with broken legs crawling around. So they shot him in the head without hesitation. All clear, one of them declared. After that they left, not speaking a single word to the rest of us who survived. The stairs whirred to life and dropped back down to the ground, signaling the end of the blackout event. Come morning, I saw how few of us made it. Barely a handful, including Mason and I. Although some of my questions got answered, I was left with even more of them to mull over for the next couple of months. What was the deal with the monsters? Where did they come from? What about the guys from Block B? And most importantly, what would we even accomplish if we made it to Block C? We'd satiate our curiosity. Sure. But we'd likely die in the process. Chris and Mason's brother were dead. No doubt about it. And I knew Mason realized as much. But then again, what else was there for us? Suicidal or not, this goal gave us something to work towards and look forward to. Something to keep us grounded and sane. It allowed us to retain a measure of control over our lives in this otherwise hopeless place. So we'd try. And we'd die. But at least it would be our choice. Morning came. And the other inmates came down from their cells to clean up the mess. I could see the terror on their faces clear as day when faced with how many people perished. All of them knew too well they stood a good chance to take their places. And that's what happened. Over the course of the next few days the ground floor cells filled up one by one. I won't go into detail about the following 2 months. They were boring and I don't know how to make them entertaining for you. It was more of the same. A repeat of my first stint. Bored out of my mind. Hungry and thirsty most days. So on and so forth. This time I tried to somewhat keep in shape by doing some limited workouts. But the nutritional deficit didn't make it easy. It's hard to retain muscle mass when you don't eat and your body decides to cannibalize itself for proteins or whatever. But they passed. And us initial survivors were little more than walking skeletons by the end. Mason and I wouldn't have another shot at it. Another 2 months of this would kill us. We had to make it count. As soon as the doors of our cells opened, we both rushed out and followed the plan. Keep quiet to avoid being found. Keep to the walls to avoid getting lost. And reach the main entrance to meet up. I lost sight of him well before that. The mist set in fast. But I pulled my part off without a hitch. Just like last time. I was by the doors when they burst open and hell rushed past me into the building. I waited for all of the monsters to pass me, tensing up for a speedy getaway. Mason? You there? I asked in a hushed voice. Yeah. On your signal. He answered. Go. We gunned it out of the building side by side, keeping close to one another at all times. Out in the courtyard, Mason took the lead and guided me towards Block C as screams filled the building we left behind. We heard more footsteps through the mist. But none were in our direct path. Most either rushed towards Block A or the perimeter wall, where the guards atop their towers gunned them down when they tried to climb. Almost here, Mason assured me, all out of breath. I wasn't any better myself though, on the verge of hyperventilating my lungs out and throwing up before curling up into a ball to die of exhaustion. Never in my life had I been that weak. And I'll do anything to avoid being like that again. But we made it after a couple of minutes, finding the doors wide open. It was the closest we'd ever gotten to Block C, right up against it. So I took a moment to observe it as we caught our breath. The walls were thicker, and so were the steel doors. It had some windows on the upper floors. But we'd never seen anyone behind the bars. You sure about this? I asked Mason. Yeah. Will you chicken out? No chance. Let's go. We entered the building side by side, trembling with both fear and anticipation. Light emanated from inside, filtered by the milky fog. But it didn't come from the ceiling or the emergency lights that came on everywhere else. It came from the floor. From the middle of the building. What the I started. But someone stopped me. What are you two doing here? We turned. Bumping into each other. Finding a man in the doorway behind us. The orange jumpsuit stood out even through the mist. Though that could have been because of the high-power flashlight mounted on his rifle. Mason turned. Ready to bolt as I thought of what to say. But the man shot a round into the floor by out feet. Talk. He demanded. See. It's a funny story. We got lost. I said without missing a beat. Aha. The man said. Though he didn't sound convinced. You got lost and somehow made it all the way out here. That is funny. I'll give you that. Now tell me the truth before I cap your asses. We want to see what's in here. Mason answered. To not die ignorant. Why stop us? I couldn't see the man's face clearly. What with all of the mist and the blinding light pointed right in our faces. But even so, I was sure he smiled a shit-eating grin at us. You two have guts. I like that. Tell you what. Return to your cells and no one has to die here tonight. Come on. Mason pleaded. We'll die anyway. At least. I can't. The man answered. Now come. Those things are bound to return with fresh kills any moment now. We looked at each other. Both completely blown away by the turn of events. What now? Try to make a break for it despite the warning? Get shot in the back? We were both ready to die. But not like this. Not without reaching our goal. I nodded at Mason. And although I could see he regretted it, he nodded back. So we followed the man out of the building. Through the courtyard and towards the tables. A few monsters approached us on the way. But he shot them down and the rifle proved effective. When we reached the tables, he sat down and placed the rifle in his lap. Then he thought better of it. Know how to shoot? He asked me. More or less. I answered. Great. He said and tossed the rifle to me. Keep watch for a bit. Would you? He was awfully unfazed and trusting. What if I decided to shoot him instead? Not that I would. I was too curious to see where this was going. But still. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. Lit one up. And drew in a lungful of smoke that got lost in the mist. You guys smokers? Want one? Mason turned him down. And I nearly did so myself. It had been a long time since I'd last had a smoke. The nicotine cleared out of my system so it would make me dizzy as all hell. Plus my state wouldn't help that. But screw it. Take any silver linings you're granted in here. Right? Right. I accepted his offer. So he lit up a cigarette for me as well and handed it over. What do you want with us? Mason asked after a long moment of silence. You clearly don't want to kill us or turn us in. Clearly. The man said. Truth is, I like you two idiots. Takes balls to try something like this. So I have an offer. But first things first. Introductions. Jack. Mason. Theodore. But you can call me Theo for short. Nice to meet you. Jack and Mason. I wasn't sure what to make of Theo. The guy was strange from the get-go. Over the top in his mannerisms. Over the top in every word he spoke. Every line sounded fake somehow. Fabricated and rehearsed. Like he was trying to put up a front. Which, granted, wasn't the strangest thing to ever happen to me by a long shot. But it didn't make for a good first impression. You two survived the previous blackout event. Correct? He asked. Yeah. Great. Balls and potential. This is exciting. What do you want? Mason repeated. Sounding pissed off by that point. Straight to the point. Huh? Fine. Theo said with a sigh. Adding killjoy under his breath. I want to refer the two of you for Block B. If you're up for it. Take it from me. It's by far the best place to be in this shithole. For the second time that night. We were both utterly floored. Left speechless. Theo just laughed at our reaction. What? Not interested? You won't make it for long back there. You'll die by the next blackout event. Monster to your six. By the way. I turned and shot blindly into the fog. Hearing the thump of bullets hitting a mass of flesh. The monster let out a screech and scurried away. I didn't say that. I retorted. Dizzy from the rush of nicotine and the adrenaline the recoil sent flooding into my veins. I'm down for it. Count me in. Jack. Mason said forcefully. Elbowing my ribs. What? Think about it for even a second. We have no other choice here. Mason sighed deeply. But he didn't say anything else. He knew I was right. Search for answers be damned. We couldn't search for shit if we died. Fine. I'm in too. Great. Theo said and clapped his hands together. He got up from the seat and approached me. Can I have that back? Please. Sure, I said, handing him back his rifle. So what now? Do we follow you back to Block B or? Not yet, Theo said. The gears around here turn slowly. It'll take some time. Go back to your cells for the meantime. But, look, it's not a promise. Okay? Just a chance, Theo said bluntly. But it sure as shit beats your other options. Neither one of us liked that. But we resigned ourselves to our choice. Theo turned to leave through the fog. But he left us with some parting words. We'll talk some more later. Hopefully under better circumstances. Trust me. Boys. I have big plans for us. Trust him. Huh? The mere concept almost made me laugh. Trust was a commodity in here. And perhaps the one in shortest demand. But our options were limited. Theo left after that. So Mason and I waited there for the blackout event to end. We couldn't risk moving through the fog. But we'd be fine if we kept quiet. A few minutes later it was over with. So we returned to Block A when the mist started dissipating. The same carnage we'd gotten used to greeted us. Though we were desensitized to it by now. We just parted and returned to our cells without speaking another word to each other. There was nothing left to say. The rest of it went like last time. Electricity came back on. The cell doors closed on their own. The guys from Block B came in to sweep the area and check for survivors. This time I spotted Theo among them. He was the one leading them and that gave me some hope. Only Mason and I made it that time. Everyone else was dead. Come morning. I didn't sleep a wink. My mind was too busy running in circles at all the possibilités. Reinvigorated by the hope coursing through me. I was so sure we'd die that I didn't care. I abandoned my sense of self-preservation. But now I stood a chance. An actual, honest-to-God chance to survive in the long term. So I wouldn't kick it away. The other inmates cleaned the ground floor by lunchtime. And to my surprise, one of them brought me food and water. He passed the stuff to me between the bars. Along with a message. Theo sends his regards. And a request. Keep in shape. Tell him I'll do my best. The guy was a rat. I was sure of it. But hey, I had food. So I wouldn't complain. He gave Mason some too. Probably along with the same message. From that day forward, we didn't go hungry anymore. Theo's rat brought us breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And let me tell you this. You all might take it for granted. But you've got no idea how big of a positive impact having a full belly has on your mental health. We were still neck deep in shit. Don't get me wrong. But regaining some of the privileges we lost was amazing. Nearly brought me to tears. It might sound dark. And in all fairness it is. But it's the truth. I recovered slowly. But I didn't take it easy for long. After a week or two to allow my body to bounce back, I started training the best I could. Push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks, anything and everything to keep in shape like Theo demanded. Across the floor, I could see Mason doing the same. Time passed like that. And soon enough another month had gone by. One day, when the rat came with our food, I stopped him for chatter. Any word from Theo? I asked. He told me to tell you this in case you start asking questions. Have some patience. The gears turn slowly. Got it. More time passed. And we soon neared the next blackout event. I had patience. Not like I had a choice. But I was starting to get worried. Would Theo get it done before it hit? Would we have to survive another one? Did it even matter? Though? We pulled it off twice. So I was confident we could do it again now that we knew what we were doing. Still, luck played a huge part in it and hours could run out at any moment. At the 2-month mark, the rat returned with a final message. One more time. To convince the higher-ups. Well, fuck me. He carried the same message to Mason. And even from so far away, I saw him flinch in anger and frustration. But it couldn't be helped. We signed ourselves up so now we had to face the music and hope for the best. A few days later, that's precisely what we ended up doing. The blackout event came. So we sprung into action. We rushed out of the cells, followed the walls, and met up near the main entrance. My plan was to take our chances in the yard. So we waited for the monsters to come in. As soon as the last one passed us and we didn't hear any others, we took off. But this time we had a nasty surprise. Theo and 2 other orange jumpsuits waited there. Rifles pointed at us. Was this a betrayal? Why? Sorry boys. You'll have to weather the storm in there this time. Theo let us know. Out here it's too easy. Fucking Mason let out. But Theo interrupted him. He let out a shot with the rifle into the ceiling. Predictably enough, that sent all of the monsters in a frenzy and coming our way. Mason tensed up and raised his fists. But I kept a level head. We had to move real fucking quick. We couldn't waste time arguing. So I grabbed his arm and pulled him away. Behind us, Theo and his pals closed the door and locked it again, trapping us in there. We had to get higher up to find safety. The ground floor was a literal killing floor and we wouldn't last long in it. Luckily we got somewhat back into shape. So it should have been doable. When we reached the catwalk, get on my shoulder and grab on. I'll climb up on you then pull you up as well. I shared my plan with Mason. Let's. He agreed. We ran through the mist, with monsters and other inmates passing us every now and again. Most were too busy running to or from each other, until one decided we looked tastier than his previous target. A tall beast, easily 8 feet in height, but scrawny. Its muscles were well defined, but its skin was ripped to shreds here and there where it gave way as it expanded. With all of that in mind, let's call it Lanky. Lanky let out a high-pitched screech and lunged. Mason pushed me to the ground and followed me down as well. So Lanky missed and flew over us. We took off on all fours like that, hoping to reach that catwalk and get away. But it chased after us. Of course it wouldn't be easy. We kept dodging, working together to remain one step ahead of Lanky's attacks. Come on. Make it fast, I told Mason when we got below the catwalk. He ran up from behind and climbed on my shoulders as I tried to keep steady. Lanky let out another screech. Not far behind us. I felt Mason tense up, the wavering in his legs gone before he told me he got a grip. I got out from under him and grabbed a hold of his jumpsuit to climb him like a ladder. But Lanky interrupted us. It struck me from behind and sent me to the ground, like I'd been run over by a damn car. Then it slapped Mason away too, hard enough to send him flying into the nearest wall some 6 feet away. Lanky stepped over me to go to Mason, and I knew I had to do something fast to save our asses. I looked up at it, observing it for a weak point I could exploit, and settled on its spine. It was the thinnest part of its body by far, mostly exposed bone with a wisp of muscles to keep it connected. Barely about the thickness of my forearm. I bolted to my feet and ran into Lanky from behind, hoping to tackle it. No dice. It remained standing. All I managed was to piss it off. It swiveled on its heels and tried to swat me away. But I dodged below its arm. On my way back up, I delivered a punch in its groin. But it also had little effect. I needed to attack that spine. After I dodged another slam, I punched one of the vertebrae. But it felt like reinforced concrete against my fist. Fucking, I pouted, holding my fist as I retreated. I couldn't do this. Not on my own. There was a reason why so many people died to these things. They were tough. Perhaps impossible to take down empty-handed. Mason. On it, Mason answered from somewhere within the fog. I kept Lanky busy for a few more moments. It didn't manage to land a blow on me, only glancing my jumpsuit. But even that was enough. It ripped through the material and reached the skin beneath, leaving behind long, shallow gashes. One of those across my abdomen and I'd be picking my intestines off the ground. Mason. I cried out again. Do it. Mason rolled over and got on all fours behind Lanky. I dodged another swipe and went in, pushing into it and using the momentum of its attack in my favor. Lanky went backwards. His leg snagged on Mason, and it toppled over on its back. Twist the head. Clockwise, I instructed while grabbing onto its legs. Mason did as told, even though I could see it was difficult for him. Who knew how many bones he'd broken from that one hit? But my plan worked. We twisted Lanky in opposite directions from opposite ends at the same time. His spine, being the weakest link in its body, gave out with a sickening crack. Not enough to kill it, but at least it was incapacitated so we could carry out our initial plan. Can you still move? I can force myself, Mason answered as I helped him away from Lanky. Let's get this over with. He climbed on top of my shoulders again. But Lanky just wouldn't give up. Even with a broken spine, it crawled our way using its arms. At least it moved slower though. I jumped to avoid another swipe at my legs, giving Mason a much needed push so he could reach the catwalk. He grabbed on, so I held onto him in midair without falling back. Below us, Lanky screeched and yelped, angry that we got away. I climbed all the way up, over the railing and onto the catwalk of the first floor. Then I turned around and helped Mason up as well, before we both collapsed. Way did it, he mumbled, clearly in a lot of pain. Theo. I screamed. Fuck you. Theo. We made it. Get us out. The main entrance was thrown wide open. So we waited for the blackout event to end and for the mist to dissipate. I took that time to check on Mason. Finding a huge bruise on his abdomen where Lanky's fist made contact and an equally big one on his back where he collided with the wall. No broken bones as far as I could tell. But it would still hurt like a bitch for a while. When it was finally over with and the stairs dropped back down, Theo rushed into the building with his team. Mason and I walked downstairs to meet them, with me propping him up. Phenomenal job, Theo said with a grin, putting his rifle aside to give us a slow clap. I didn't expect you two to survive that. Color me impressed. I had a whole assortment of colorful words to lay down on him. But I abstained. Couldn't risk pissing him off. Not when we were out of our cells and at his mercy. He could just as easily dispose of us as he could help us. So is it a yes or a no? Are we in? You're in. Alright, he said and turned to leave. Boys, finish up here. You two, follow me.